Hello and welcome to Bookview, the monthly feature from the New Indian Express, where we have writers and their new offerings. I'm your host, Smita Verma, and today we are honored and privileged to have with us Dr. Shashi Tharoor. He's just released his Pride, Prejudice and Punditry at the Prabha Khaitan Foundation recently at a Delhi event. Dr. Tharoor needs no introduction. He's a prolific writer. He's a former diplomat, politician, and he wears so many hats. The one thing that he never wants former to be attached to him is former writer. So I will speak very less today, and I leave the stage open for Dr. Tharoor. So, sir, first tell me why this title. I mean, I understand the pride part. Where does prejudice come from here?
We actually tossed it off a little bit. I mean, to be honest, the themes of the book are so vast and so varied that it was very difficult to actually capture them in just one title. So we went for, after all, Pride and Prejudice is so well known. We said, let's take those. Pride in India, in all that we have been and can be. Prejudice being, unfortunately, the prevailing dogma that animates those who are in power today, and about and against whom there are so many essays in the book. And punditry, just reflecting the sort of the commentaries on contemporary politics and so on that are all there. But even this misses out, for example, my fiction, which is an important chunk at the end of the book. And you could say, well, Pride and Prejudice might let people think about fiction, but there you are. The whole idea of this book came from my publisher, David Davida, who encouraged me to put together this book on the occasion of his publishing house, Aleph's 10th anniversary, since it also marks 40 years of my published books. My first book, Reasons of State, came out in 1981. So it didn't take much persuading to convince me of the need for a volume that would expose a new readership to a wide range of my writing over the last 4 decades. Now, as you know, there's a subtitle too, which says the essential Shashi Tharoor. And whether or not this book captures the essential Shashi Tharoor is a question I'll leave to the readers. But it certainly encompasses a lot of my concerns and themes in both fiction and non-fiction, and even a smattering of poetry.
Right. It does encompass the essential Shashi Tharoor. I'll be honest, I haven't finished the book yet because there are 70 odd pieces, I believe, of writings in there. And in fact, David Davida starts the book on a very wonderful note. And he says about you when he had first met you. And then he talks about the great Indian novel and how it was a masterpiece that was right in front of him, and your writing and the early influences. Why do we see so less of Shashi the novelist?
Well, the reason is very, very simple, Smita. It's a fact that I've always been doing other things in addition to writing. And the other things increasingly made the fiction impossible. See, fiction requires not only time, which is frankly scarce enough in my life, was when I was at the UN, is when I'm in Indian politics, but it requires a space inside your head in order to create an alternative universe, to populate it with characters, incidents, dialogue, people who are as real to you as what you're encountering in your regular life. Now, the fact of the matter is that requires sort of building up a kind of glass palace of illusion. And that glass gets very easily shattered by frequent interruption. So if you're writing something, you've created this world, you're immersed in it, and you're dragged off to get involved in some constituency matter in Thiruvananthapuram or some parliamentary issue or some political problem or whatever, the net result, Smita, is immediately that glass palace develops a crack or two. And frankly, too many interruptions and the palace itself shatters. So I realized this the hard way because in the first decade of the 21st century, after my novel Riot was published in 2001, my laptops were sort of littered with half-begun manuscripts of novels, which I could never sustain because of the interruption problem. And this is why I'm afraid I'm not able, quite frankly, to be able to go back to fiction, because I've realized that unlike nonfiction, fiction is not interruptible. With nonfiction, you're writing something, you've got a train of argument. You finish what you're writing, and then you're interrupted. You go away, you come back even 2-3 weeks later, reread what you've written. The logic, the argument, the flow, what you're trying to say will come back to you and you can finish it.
Right.
At least that's my experience. So for the last 20 years, all I've published in book form is nonfiction. I've, as I say, attempted half a dozen different novels on different subjects. And once that illusion is shattered, you really can't go back to it. So at some point, I want to start all over again. But I think increasingly, it's becoming clear that I can only do this after I have relinquished, shall we say, the world of public life that has consumed me as much as Indian politics has.
Which I doubt will happen anytime soon. So
voters can always decide to return me to the world of literature.
We would want you to be there in both the worlds. So tell me, Dr. Tharoor, there's a whole collection of poetry also in this. How did you manage that? If you're saying that, the train of thoughts and the palace that you have to be there, how did you manage that with the busy life? Because I assume that also requires a lot of imagination.
No, because at least poetry has the merit of brevity. Unlike the amount of time you need to sustain that illusion for a novel, for poems, you get into the mood and you might write a poem in half an hour, 1 hour, 1.5. You don't really need to spend a heck. Of course, keep going back and polishing it and so on. It can be different. There isn't a whole lot. I think the book has just 4 poems, if I remember right. And in my novels, you will find there are a few more that I've tossed into the novels. For example, in the Great Indian Novel, I first thought of poetry, and not just poetry really, doggerel, limericks, humorous poetry, comic verse, as a diversion to organize transitions within the novel from the relatively serious and weighty things I was writing about to the next theme. And so light verse became a very good way of doing that, and I enjoyed doing it. The Great Indian Novel has 7 or 8 poems which are largely clever and funny rather than pretending to be poetic. In show business, there's not poems so much as song lyrics that I've made up to kind of mimic the song lyrics of Hindi movies. And in Riot, one of the characters is a poet. In fact, 2 of the characters have pretensions to poetry and they sometimes exchange poems with each other. And one of the characters, the American woman, her poems appear in the book. So you've got, it's not that I haven't written poetry for publication, but there's been not a lot of it. In this book, I have included poems that I actually haven't published before in any novel. So, I'm sorry, 1 poem is from Riot, but the other poems in this book are all unpublished. 1 or 2 were fairly emotional, written for, very personal moments where writing the verse was kind of an outlet for me, out of a moment of emotion. And that's very apparent when you read it. 1 poem was written without any intention of publication. I had gone to, in the UN when I was a peacekeeping official, I was frequently invited by war colleges and military around the world to lecture to them on peacekeeping so their officers could understand. I've spoken and not only in India's National Defence College in Wellington and Secunderabad and so on, but I've spoken in England's Royal College of Defence Studies, in Sandhurst, in Cambridge. I've spoken in America's Naval War College, National Defence University. So I've got this whole life doing that. But one of those speeches was in a place called Cambridge, where the British train their senior officers, handlers for the younger ones. And it was a place from which they actually sent off people to sort of fight wars in India. It was a completely colonial institution. And the walls, walking through the walls, there I was, delivering my talk, staying overnight in some general's suite, and going back to the 19th century. And there on the walls, not only in the suite, but in the corridor leading up to it, are picture after picture of a British military triumph over Indians and pictures and trophies of wars in India. So I wrote a poem called Staying at Cambridge, which was purely for my own thing. And I hope that people will enjoy it. I'm afraid we haven't given any of these explanations in the book. The poems just have to stand as poems. But but I think you'll see, that it reflects my own reaction as an Indian in that somewhat incongruous place and situation.
Right. That must be one of your favorite poems since you spoke so much about it. Which are the other chapters which are really close to your heart? Besides, I'm sure, Modi and Me.
No, close to my heart, I wouldn't include that one, because the heart is where, family and love and so on are. I have two short essays on my father and my mother, which are probably very close to my heart.
Yes.
And then there's not a whole lot of autobiography. I've resisted various approaches from publishers to write an autobiography, thinking that I don't believe I've accomplished enough for anyone to be interested in my life, even if the publishers think they can make a quick buck by so doing. But I have in fact got 4 or 5 pieces looking back on my own life, both on family and on things like my one aspect of my stint at the UN and things like that. So there are pieces there that mean a lot more to me personally. Writing about how books matter to me, and writing about my discovery, as it were, of the pleasures of reading. All of that's very personal. When you get to the history stuff, that is not just personal, but it's passionate. I mean, I really care about some of these things, and some things make me angry, and perhaps I get carried away in that process. But you've seen, for example, how I've written about that in my book, An Era of Darkness. We just have a short excerpt there. And then David had the idea we should toss in a few transcripts of my speeches, because very many people in this country seem to know me principally as a speaker. I find that the young, unlike me, I much prefer to read a text than to listen to it. But many people of the younger generation seem to prefer talks and speeches. Yes. I get very impatient because to listen to a talk or a seminar would mean spending 45 minutes to acquire information that I can read in 5. So I find it an inefficient way of doing things. But for most of the younger generation, when people come up to me, strangers at public events, a cricket stadium or a wedding reception, they always tell me about speeches of mine they've heard. So the publisher said, let's throw in a few transcripts of speeches. And I think 4 or 5 of my speeches are there as well. The rest is a little more detached. It's a little more, I've tried to manage the task as an active politician of also being an objective observer and commentator. And so there are pieces which are really written by Shashi Tharoor, the columnist, who also happens to be Shashi Tharoor, the politician. So those are not from the heart, but much more from the head, if you like. So it's really a whole range of things.
So why has Shashi Tharoor, the columnist, avoided talking about the Congress leadership?
Because Shashi Tharoor is still a politician on this party. Come on.
Yes. So, one of the interesting chapters which I really enjoyed, one of them was the Amul baby one, where you mentioned how...
Example, yeah.
Yes, your sisters were part of Amul, and how when you grew up and you also became part of Amul, and in a very different way, and you never leave a chance to laugh at yourself, and you make a big thing about how you've been played up and how you were put up on hoardings and all those things that happened. And also there's you've got to be serious. I think that's the title of that section. And it's very interesting also, Dr. Tharoor, because the times that we are living in right now, you never know when someone can get offended, when you will be in the middle of a controversy. It may be a photograph, a selfie, a comment, or a speech about the 2 Indias that we come from. You never know what may offend someone. Do you think that it's only... we as Indians have lost the ability to laugh at ourselves, or is it a global phenomena that we are seeing right now?
Purely Indian problem. Because India is a country where people seem to believe that humor doesn't have a place in something as serious as politics. I disagree. The Brits disagree all the time. They have humor and jokes, even in common serious debates. Look, I think humor can be a source of camaraderie and friendship. It's essential for people who often find themselves at odds with each other in the political realm, but it's been quite rare in India. And let's face it, attempts at humor misfire all too easily in our multilingual polity. So something you say that may work as a joke in one language could suddenly come across negatively once translated. And because we are a country of multiple languages, that's an additional risk. And our trigger-happy outrage culture leaves little room for humor in politics. As you know, I've been reminded of that more than once, and I've learned the hard way the wisdom of Shakespeare's sage observation that the success of a jest lies in the ear of the hearer, not the tongue of the teller. In other words, for a politician, you have to realize it's much less important what you intend to say, even what you think you've said, than what people think they hear or maliciously told they've heard. So being humorless in public is usually the safer path. But I'm incorrigible. I just can't resist it once in a while. And I know sometimes that if I'm doing something that almost certainly will create all sorts of reactions. Mm-hmm. And I tell myself, am I going to constantly play the game of sort of self-censoring myself because of fear or anticipation of the reactions? And so I go ahead and do it anyway. And sure enough, I get 25 people the next day telling me I shouldn't have done it, look at the reactions. But I can assure my friends, my well-wishers, that especially now, I mean, I think certainly in my first couple of years in politics, I was a babe in the woods. I had no idea. You can say genuinely that I was totally astonished by some of the reactions. Now I know too much to claim that I didn't expect the reaction. I expect the reactions now, but I've decided that I'm going to be a bit defiant. And if it means sticking out like a sore thumb, so I will. I really don't want to be a cookie cutter politician. I don't want to be somebody who's, interchangeable with anybody else. Because, there are plenty of people in politics who will do what the party tells them, speak as the party urges them, behave as they're expected to by society, conceal a lot of things about themselves or about their lives and tastes and preferences because they fear it would not go over well with their voters, etc. I'm very happy just being myself, and my voters realize what they see is what they get. What they hear is who I am. What they read is what I believe. And that's to my mind, one of my more useful contributions to Indian politics is to say, look, you can be like me and still have a place. It may not be perhaps as good a place as some others might have had, but it's a place which I believe has its own value. It has its own distinctions.
Absolutely. And in fact, one of the chapters where you talk about, the vision that you had when you entered politics and the dreams that you had, there are so many things you wanted to achieve. And then the harsh reality hit upon you. This is not how it works out. You wanted to do so many things, but then you also have to fulfill the duty of finding a job for someone or talking to a grandfather about his grandchild's placement, things like those. Now you've been there for 3 successive terms, sir. So how have you changed from the first term to now?
I've really tried hard not to change, but the only thing is I've become a little wiser. In other words, having gone through the experiences, if you learn nothing from them, then of course you really have something wrong with you. So I've learned a lot, and I'm much more familiar with a lot of things. And I've seen both the strengths and the limitations of this profession. In the system we have, which is, in my view, not the greatest system. It's not in this book, but I have an essay in another book about why we should go to the presidential system rather than the parliamentary one, because I think the parliamentary system is completely foreign to our nature. But that's neither here nor there. We can have that conversation separately. I do want to say, though, that in my view, given the system we have, a lot of practices have evolved, which by and large do some good. And I think certainly there are variations throughout the country, but I can speak honestly of what I've seen in Kerala is that honestly, there's a tremendous degree of commitment and desire to show the public that we are there to serve them. And again, it may be a bit different in North India, but in Kerala, my voters believe they're the boss. There's none of the reverential genuflections that you see when you visit constituencies of your northern friends. In what I've seen of Kerala politics, the people with the sense of entitlement are the voters, not the politicians.
Absolutely. I agree. I'm from Kerala. I know that.
Okay.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that you are the people's servant over there, and you have to deliver or be out. That's definitely the sentiment. So, Dr. Tharoor, I think we have just about enough time for one quick question here. So your next book is going to be on Ambedkar. Okay. Do you think you will quote controversy there? Are you trying to be... what are you going to write about it? What will the book be about, if you can tell?
I'm still researching, Smita. So until I read more. I don't want to say what I'm going to write because I haven't decided what I'm going to write. And with me, a lot of my insights come through the writing. As I delve into the work, I'll pick pieces of his that I would like to read, and events and episodes in his life that I feel are important. But then when I sit down and distill them and write them, that's when I really will get my insights. But I'm not setting out to be controversial. I neither have an Arun Shuri kind of thesis against him, nor an Arundhati Roy kind of thesis of making him a saint. I'm very interested in a number of aspects of his life, and therefore it's an autobiography. You may know I wrote a short autobiography of Nehru, which I'm pleased to say has worn very well. It was published initially in 2003, and a new, without any changes, but with a new preface edition, was issued by Penguin in 2018, I think it was, 15 years after the original. So it's a book that really has stood up. It's a book that tries to examine Nehru's life from the vantage point of our times. And that's what I broadly want to replicate. It has the merit of brevity. This will also be a brief book. I want to tell the story of the life, and through that story, try and distill some lessons, and then come up with my understanding or my appreciation of his legacy, which is a considerable legacy, no question about it. But I'm not here to stoke up any controversies. I don't have any controversial ideas. My idea is to tell a story and help people understand. It's a book, by the way, which is going to be slightly different here and in the UK, because I've also been commissioned by a British publisher. So there it'll be perhaps focusing a little less on some of the details of Indian political life that all of us here are more familiar with than a general interest leadership would be. So I'm going to write a very straightforward book. Don't anticipate any dramatic headlines. But it should be the kind of book that people say you must read one short book on Ambedkar's life. This is it, because as with Nehru, every good book on Ambedkar is 800 pages, 400 pages, 3 volumes, all of that stuff. And as with Nehru, I felt you need something short and accessible for ordinary people.
And as with most of your books, one should read it, and one should read Pride, Prejudice and Punditry, the essential Shashi Tharoor. How can one discover, just the last question, how can one discover the essential Shashi Tharoor?
By reading that.
By reading this book?
I've been privileged and fortunate in being able to pursue so many of my interests and passions in one lifetime, right? I had a long and interesting career at the UN, where I had the opportunity to contribute towards addressing many of the great global challenges of our time, leaving my smudgy thumbprints on the footnotes of the pages of history. In politics, I've been grateful to the people of Thiruvananthapuram who have seen fit to make me their representative 3 times over. And my political career has given me moments of great turbulence and great satisfaction, but really always the comfort of being able to rest at night, knowing that things I've done during the day have made a difference in people's lives. I know that some of my research and writing has not just been of personal satisfaction, it's stimulated other people's scholarship, and that makes me proud as well. And then the writing has been immensely rewarding and integral to the person I am today. I would not be who I am without the ideas and the values that have defined my life, ideas and values that I've had the honor of sharing with the world through my writing. So writing has really been the essential part of me. It's the path on which I hope to carry on trudging as long as possible. And as you already quoted, Smita, I am a former minister. One day I'll be a former MP, but I hope I'll never be a former writer. So that is where you get the essence for what it's worth. But I'm not going to claim that everything that's essential is in this volume. If we had put in all the pieces I wanted to include, the book would have been unaffordable and uncarryable. So we stopped with 75. But there's plenty more that I think are also pretty good reflections of what matters to me and has mattered to me.
Great. And we hope you are never a former novelist also, Dr. Tharoor. We really would like to have one more, the Great Indian Novel, something like that come from your...
It'll have to be different because everything I do is... The very word novel implies something new. So I want to write something new and different from what I've written before, but I really want to. To me, getting back to fiction is important, and I'd like to sort of be around in order to do that before too long.
Thank you, Dr. Tharoor. Thank you for giving us your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Smita. All the best.